Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Tonight we're going to talk about the strategy for creating exchanges and queues in a RabbitMQ setup. The usual setup that or not the usual setup, but the setup that many users in the beginning especially is the centralized setup where we define all our queues and exchanges, maybe through the management console that we have attached right here. That means that we go to our browser and then we go manually and type in the exchanges that we need and also the queues that we need, and then we can test that they work through the management console and everything is good, right? Another way is to feed the management console or feed the RabbitMQ with a definitions file with queues and exchanges and bindings. This can actually be done with an import or export through the management console. First we can export one set of configuration from one place, and then we can import it, and then all the queues will then be and exchanges and the bindings will then be created on the RabbitMQ. That is also a way to solve it, but this is not as flexible as the decentralized way, because instead of using a definition file to create queues and exchanges and bindings, then we can actually have the producer, the Spring Boot producer, through the Rabbit admin, to the Rabbit admin class. Then we can actually easily create an exchange. So that means that when we create some producer, then we can also create an exchange on the Rabbit server. So that means that the first time the producer, or whenever the producer starts up, it will check if this exchange is present, and it will also, if it's not present, my exchange one, if that is not present, then it will create it with the correct type. It might be a fan out exchange, and it could also be a direct exchange, right? So then it will create the exchange, and then all the consumers, all the clients, all the consumers of messages, they can then themselves create a queue that matches the exchange, and they can also create the binding to that exchange. So that means that first of all, when the Spring Boot producer starts up, then we get the exchange. And in the beginning, it will just send some messages that will then not be read by or transferred to any queues, because we don't have any clients yet. And then at some point, then we get a Spring Boot consumer. Then the Spring Boot consumer starts up. It will then, of course, it needs to know which exchange that it should use. But then, of course, then it will create a queue. After it creates a queue, then it will actually create a binding. The binding will have the information of an exchange, a routing key, and the queue. So that means that then the Spring Boot consumer will then start receiving those messages. So that means that we have one queue per consumer. So that means that if we have another consumer, let's say we spin up another Spring Boot application that needs the same information, then they will just create a second queue. I'll just create a second queue right here, and we'll also just create a second binding against the same exchange. This setup gives a very flexible, it is very flexible, and we don't need to think about and maintain a definitions file where we have the whole world included. We can just have a RabbitMQ as a service, and then all of our application. And when I say Spring Boot, of course, it does not need to be Spring Boot. It could be someone, it could be another producer. And when I say Spring Boot consumer, of course, it could also be another consumer. But then the producer will then have the responsibility of creating the exchange and also to post the messages to the exchange. So that means that, let's say that it actually has a REST API right here. So we have some API right here, /API/ post message or something like that, post message. Then this API could then send a message when this is triggered, and when we post a message to this to the REST controller right here, then we could actually create that message and send it to the exchange, and then all the consumers that are interested in that message will then get that message. So this setup is much more flexible. It's much more dynamic. Of course, you should always choose a solution that fits your need, but this I would definitely recommend you to think about if this solution could not be the right one for you. In the next video, I will actually show you how a setup in Spring Boot could actually be made using these principles right here, where we have a producer that automatically creates that automatically creates the exchange, and then we have some consumers that then creates a queue and the binding. Thank you very much for listening. have a great evening and hope to see you again soon, especially for the next video where I will show you in IntelliJ how to create a multi-module project where we are doing exactly this. Thank you very much. Bye bye.